Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second of today's webinars. This time we're going to focus on ISO 27001 changes. Now, apologies for those of you that were on the previous call, because you're just about to hear me repeat some of the spiel I did earlier. But this is, as I've said, a series of calls that we're doing, series of sessions we're doing today. They are being recorded and they will be put on YouTube and on our website a little bit later. If you have any questions, then please put them into the chat box. We'll get through them, as many of them as possible. We're conscious this is a topic that is like to cause a few questions as we go through. And our plan for this session is very much to provide sort of 15 minutes of just a summary of where the ISO 27001 standard is changing, and then to give you the opportunity to ask as well lots of questions of Barry, who's joining me today. There will be a short survey at the end of the call, and please, 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 please feedback. We like feedback, doesn't matter if it's good feedback, doesn't matter if it's bad feedback. We value all feedback because it helps us to customise the sessions that we'll do again in the future. For those of you who don't know who Risk Evolves are, we are a management consultancy company that specialise in governance, risk and compliance. Somebody's got to love compliance, and we do. We are kind of governance geeks, and that covers everything from general risk management, data privacy, information security, which is obviously what we're talking about today, environmental, social and governance, any ISO certifications, and then finally health and safety as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Barry. Barry, it's probably worthwhile for some of the attendees who've not met you before, just to explain who you are and why we're talking about ISO 27001.
Yeah, absolutely, of course. So welcome all and good morning. I know some people may have met me before, but others obviously new to me. I'm Barry Graham. Although I work for Helen now, after much negotiation over the last year or so, in my former life, and it's something I still do, is I am a ISO 27001 auditor for certification bodies, primarily NQA, but we do some work with other people. So I am the auditor who comes along at the end of your implementation project to make sure that there's compliance with what you've done and requirements of the standard. So I've joined Helen now, so poacher turned gamekeeper, as somebody's previously told me, and now I work with Helen and Risk Evolves, both auditing and implementing 27001. So I've got a handle on the requirements of the standard in terms of how it should look when implementing and the end process. There are some changes, nothing stands still. If you are familiar with ISO, you will know that periodically there are refreshes to all of the standards which they have in play in order to keep it current and keep it up to date with the reality in the world we live in. And in some respects, ISO 27001 is a little bit behind. I think that would be fair to say, Helen, in terms of the circles, the ecosystem in which ISO 27001 exists concerns information technology and information security. And there hasn't been realistically an update on the kind of controls we expect to see in place for the risks identified against that kind of information security picture since 2013. There was a brief update in 2017, but primarily terminology, nothing new, so to speak. So the changes we're going to go through today are long overdue, I think it's fair to say. Okay, so just a quick view. This isn't death by PowerPoint. What I'm hoping to do is talk to you for another 10 minutes to bring you up to speed with what the changes are, what the structural changes are going to be. But the most important part of this session we're in right now is your interaction. I know, for example, some people who are on the call have a certificate, and the changes will affect how they're going to move forward in terms of maintaining what they've already got in place. I also know for a fact that some people on the call are looking to achieve certification in the future. So hopefully this slide and subsequent questions and answers will get to the root of that. So first point I've got on there is the Annex SL structure is not changing. So if you are familiar with ISO, you'll know that clauses 4 to 10, which includes setting the context, understanding how leadership interacts, planning for risks, so on and so forth, they're not changing. So the documentation set you have right now will largely remain intact. There will be a couple of adjustments required, but no wholesale changes ultimately. What has changed is the Annex A. So unique in ISO 27001 is the requirement of the implementation is to use the controls which are given to you in the standard in Annex A against the risks you've identified when you're conducting your planning processes. This is what's been updated. It's the Annex A controls, and we'll go on to how that looks in a moment. Those are taken from ISO 27002. So the relationship between 27001 and 2 is that the Annex A controls in 27001 are kind of expanded upon in 27002, and it gives you a bit more of a prescriptive in terms of what that means. So for example, 27001, there's a control that says you must conduct periodic backups if that's one of your risk controls. 27002 demonstrates how you can show compliance of doing things like that. So 27002 changes were made in February, tested, adjusted as required, and reflected in Annex A of 27001, which is released in October. Good news in that there has been a decrease in the overall number of controls. Those with an existing system will know with their statement of applicability document, there are 114 controls in Annex A, and you must justify or exclude as required. That overall number has been reduced to 93. More importantly, perhaps equally as importantly, should I say, is the reduction in the number of domains. So at present, there is A5 for policy all the way through to A18 in compliance, and there's 14 domains in total. That's been reduced to just 4. So A5 to A8 will be the new structure. So again, simplification in terms of how the controls are structured and a reduction in the overall number of controls. However, it's not simplifying what already exists, quite simply put. There are new controls and merging of controls. I'm reluctant to say there's been deleted controls because some of the overlapping stroke repetitive controls have been formed into one more coherent control, and we'll go into what some of those might mean, and you can certainly ask me any questions you've got in that regard. So that's it. That's a quick view of the changes without being specific and giving you the exact detail. There is a white paper on the Risk Evolves website if you need more detail and a little bit of a structural diagram on which controls have been merged, for example. We're not going to do that in this session unless you specifically ask me that question, but there is something available on our webpage for you to go and have a look at after this. So some of the more frequently asked questions, I'll hopefully head those off so I can get to the specific questions you might have for today. So when are the changes going to take place? Like I said in the previous slide, the 27002, which guides what Annex A should look like, was updated in February of this year, and the changes from Annex A will be aligned in October of this year. So I've met people along my journey, and some of them are certainly here today, so welcome, who said, I want to start implementing ISO. Should I wait for these changes to be published, or should I start now? The answer is, whenever you hope to achieve certification by, go for it. If you wanted to achieve certification, then just start. Start as you're doing now. Go through the implementation project. Conscious, however, that if your audit date is beyond October, the likelihood is you're going to have to look at the new standard instead of the 2013 iteration of 27001. However, if your audit date, as per question 3, comes to the left and you can be audited before these changes take place, then you're quite happily achieve certification to the standard which exists at this time of the webinar. So a question I've come across at least 3 times in this last week, both privately and personally, is the new version more complicated? Okay, like I've hopefully illustrated in the previous slide, a moderate change in the number of controls and the structure of the controls you've selected in your statement of applicability is the majority of the work that needs to be done. Subsequent signposting to where evidence of those controls in existence, the operational processes, will have to catch up, because there's some things new to the standard you've probably never done before, and we can go through that certainly if you've got any questions in that space after this. So for example, the standard at the moment doesn't prescribe an outline of how cloud services interact with your ISMS. It also doesn't ask you to explain your threat intelligence picture or threat analysis process. And data masking is alluded to, but not really specified. And those are requirements in the new version of the standard. So those are things, if you don't do them already, you're going to have to demonstrate if you select them as part of your risk control set. So that's a very quick walk through the 27001 proposed changes and some of the more common questions. In terms of the content for me speaking to you and explaining what 27001 changes are coming, I think that's okay. What I'd like to do is just throw it open to the floor if we can, and take any questions you've got specific to the controls which are coming, or anything else you want to discuss. So, Dean, is everybody able to have a look?
And Barry, whilst you've been talking, one of the things that we've just done is posted the blog that you've referenced into the chat for everybody, so they can all go and see. The blog goes into a little bit more detail, doesn't it, on some of the changes to those controls and how those controls emerged and then regrouped into those 4 overarching control sections.
Yep. Okay.
So there's a lot there. I guess we're going through, risk of oils, as Barry's already mentioned, is both ISO 27001 certified and ISO 27701 certified, which is an extension to the 27001 certification process. We've got our transition audit to do potentially at the end of this year, Barry, haven't we? So how does transition to the new standard work in terms of recertification cycles as well? Should you wait to a recertification cycle and then transition, or do it midway? What's your guidance there?
So I think just naturally allow it to occur as part of the flow. When the certification bodies are, you know, inside the new scale of the new standard. So from the 1st of October 2022, the certification bodies will start issuing guidance to their customers about when transition will occur from them. Quite simply put, if you've got audit dates planned, which are already in the pipeline, against the certificate, which is in the cycle, so a 3-year cycle. So if you certified this year, last year, or in some circumstances in 2020, then you're actually going to maintain the certification for the standard you've already got. However, if your recertification is coming around about this time, then you're going to have to address the new standard. What nobody will make you do is hold your feet to the fire between now and October and say you must implement this new system before 2022 version of the standard comes around and show all this new way of working. There will be a grace period also. So like if anybody's familiar with 9001, which was another recent change, then there was a bit of a grace period, or 22301, business continuity standards changed recently in 2019, I believe, and we had up to 2022 to get everybody through it. So yes, the changes are coming, and yes, they reflect best practice or the common picture in terms of the reality in the world we live in, but nobody's going to make you do this at the next opportunity. You know, it's going to be explained to you by your certification body where your certificate is issued, exactly when you will have to go through this change.
Okay, and that grace period we know is going to be between 2 and 3 years, don't we? That's the standard that we saw with, as you say, 9001, with 45001, with 22301. They've all had a 2 to 3 year, or actually 22301 had a 4-year grace period. But yes, there's definitely a period, isn't there, transition?
Yeah, absolutely.
Any questions from the floor, Dean? I don't know whether we've got everybody off mute. Are you able to confirm? If not, we've got any ones in the chat box. What do you see, Barry, as as probably the biggest single change which is happening here?
It's understanding. So at the moment, it's kind of a freewheel. So when you go through the initial implementation project, what you're asked to do is concoct a list of possible risks. So you identify your information assets as one of the first steps in the planning phase. And then from there, you say, okay, what are the risks to these assets? And then you select Annex A controls to say, here's how we're going to mitigate those risks or control those risks. In the new version of the standard, there's new risk controls, which aren't a result of a merge of things which already exist. They're brand new things, and one potentially, which is a potentially tricky thing to do. A really good risk control, which some organizations will be familiar with, but non-technical organizations perhaps won't be, is data masking. And that's the process of jumbling up data, especially personally identifiable data. So we're crossing over into data privacy realms here. But if you process PII, then the new standard asks you to implement a control where you pseudonymize data, for example, or use a form of data which is only understood by the organization. So if that organization was to lose some data, then they would just see a series of numbers and letters, for example, which means nothing to, just as an IP address doesn't physically give you, it can be traced, but it doesn't physically give you somebody's point in time and a geographical location. It's a separation between where the data exists and some of the things you've put into place. And likewise, threat intelligence. So now you've got to go and understand the problem. So there has always been a mandate to have training, education and awareness for people who operate inside an information security management system. Now there's a mandate to have threat intelligence. Where are those problems coming from? So it's a next step again, and you've got to be able to demonstrate, is this only in the scope area? Is this just an IT team thing, or does everybody need to be aware? For example, what a phishing email looks like. It's more prescriptive, so it's more detailed in terms of what you must demonstrate in terms of an effective control. So it's bringing that education and training thing to life through risk control, and that's something we've not been asked to do before.
Okay,
Yeah,
and that's important, isn't it, Barry? Because this isn't just about technical controls. This is about back to those organisational controls as well. So education, policies, looking outward as well about those external third parties that you can get threat intelligence from, such as the National Cybersecurity Centre, such as the Cyber Resilience Centres, organisations that can provide you with information about current threats to UK PLC, and then obviously your businesses as well.
Yeah, exactly that. There will be some signposting. So reputable organisations such as ours, Helen, and some of the better certification bodies will give you a steer on, you know, if you're sat there now going, oh my God, what is threat intelligence? How do I understand where the problems exist? Nobody's asking you to go and educate yourself and become an SME in the threat picture in the cyber environment. Quite simply, it's a case of seeking that help in that initial instance to understand where do these problems come from and where do these problems lie, and then through a bit of, you know, external delivery or harvesting of existing resources and information, being able to demonstrate within your management system that you know this, you've brought this information in from the outside world and communicated it to where it needs to go. So yeah, it's another indicator of a cultural thing. So the ISMS is not just a standalone thing just to get the certificate. Actually, it becomes a part of a business, and the culture of security is demonstratable. So I think it's a good risk control, if not a tricky thing to have to navigate in the first instance.
Okay, and we apologies to everybody. We had a couple of problems unmuting everybody, but if anybody has got any questions for Barry before I ask him some more, feel free, please, to step in. Or, of course, you can put questions into the chat box as well. So if I just pause, let anybody else speak.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay. One of the other new controls is data leakage prevention. Now, I know there's the whole service that you can purchase, but again, will we be looking potentially for organisational measures as well as technical controls?
Yes, technical controls is one thing, but of course, the you know, some of the more famous documented incidents of recent times haven't been technical loss. It's been from people physically grabbing information and leaving the building. So there's always things to do. It's not just a case of relying on the service. It's having, again, I keep coming back to the word, in fostering a security culture, and that includes, you know, what physical access do people have to information, and we'll use the example of an organization which does secure scanning or printing for legal teams, which goes on, you know, there is a requirement for court evidence, for example, to produce a pack of information where there are 7 labeled packs of information. Now that information must be kept safe and separate from normal operational processes such as brochure printing, for example, but it's all got to go on under one roof. Now having technical controls to make sure, you know, our friendly hacker comes in and extracts the information in a cyber attack is one way of being effective, but data leakage can also be hard copy. So you know, the whole building the whole picture of security, and this is just one other way of being able to demonstrate that, especially where you've outsourced. So you use a managed service provider and they've come in and provided part of the security picture. Your job isn't done. You know, there's still another part of the security picture which you have responsibility for. So there's always things you can do in-house to meet that control need.
Brilliant, brilliant. We haven't rehearsed this call at all, so I'm now going to ask the question that we haven't rehearsed. We know that we've got potentially NIS 2 coming along, so changes to the national infrastructure legislation. We've already seen the EU publish their version of it. We're expecting similar controls to be announced in the UK. What do you think the impact of that is going to be on managed service providers, and what's your view on whether the new 27001 standard will go some way to meeting some of those requirements?
Yeah, there's certain the new standard and some of the requirements we've discussed today will almost force the hand of managed service providers to be more visible and transparent in the things that they provide. Because if I go to an organization and they say, yeah, we've outsourced IT security to X, Y, and Z company limited, then I still want the organization I'm auditing to have visibility of the results, or at least the process, some form of reporting. So yeah, that ties into your question about making MSPs more, I guess, interactive, holding them to account where they need to be.
Accountable, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what this new framework will do. And of course, if you've got a 27001 system, then you've got to visit your legal and compliance register as needed and reflect this change to legislation within there. That's a free tip.
So that's a free tip. And as you rightly say, that goes back as well, doesn't it, to the original Annex A control, Annex SL controls, because they're not changing. We've still got an obligation to understand what our legislation is.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
That.
So for those on the call, NIS, as I say, was actually a piece of legislation that was introduced back in 2018, was all around making sure the national infrastructure was kept safe and secure. We've obviously adopted, from a UK perspective, the UK has a version of the NIS, which is very similar to the EU one. It is due for review, and the expectation is that anybody now that provides software as a service, anybody that provides managed service support will come into the framework of that piece of legislation. Watch this space. I think we'll get a blog out on that one over the next few weeks once we understand what the UK government intend to do.
Yeah, exactly. There's going to be more work to do on that, and the exact alignment of the legislation versus the contracts in place with MSPs and the kind of thing they provide. That's going to be an evolving theme, I think. So something we can work on.
Agree. And presumably this new version of the 27001 is still going to have our old friends in there, such as backup and recovery.
Yeah. So
those aren't going to change.
Referring to the blog, which we very kindly pasted into the chat box, within there is a table of the controls which have evaporated. I don't want to say be deleted. They've evaporated because they've been merged, and the controls which are merged, and then the controls which are new, including the new labeling scheme. And there's a couple of new things in additions as hashtags. And again, the blog explains it also. Now it just makes it easier to navigate. And for me, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion and not something that ISO or any of the certification body have said, it makes it more user friendly. So the statement of applicability can be seen as a bit of a complicated but necessary undertaking in order to achieve ISO 27001. But the systems they've now put in place streamline everything. So is this a physical problem, a technical problem, a people problem? And now you're not going through 14 different domains and 114 controls. Now you can go to people, and then where's the control? And physical, and there's the control. So yeah, definitely more user friendly. There is work to do. So if you've got a statement of applicability, there is work to do. It's not to say that this change is coming, you can ignore it, just do 3 new things. You've got to revisit your statement of applicability. And what I'm suggesting at the moment is, in parallel, retain the statement of applicability you have with all of the controls and all of the evidence there where that's posted. And then in parallel to that, think about the new standard, create a new statement of applicability against the new standards requirements, and then start slowly but surely integrating one to the other. Because you're already going to produce evidence, to use your example of backup and restore and business continuity. Those things are already in play for the new standard. Now they only exist in perhaps 2 different controls versus 4 at the moment. So now you just start signposting. And as you do that, if you do that slowly but surely, as you address each thing, such as backup, such as patching, such as business continuity and compliance and the like, then you'll begin to see in your new register where the gaps exist, because we don't do that at the moment. And you'll focus when the time comes, 6 months out, whenever you're told by your certification body, here's the particular piece of work we need to be able to make visible because we have never done it before. So I'm going to suggest keep things spinning as they are right now, but have a statement of applicability with all of the new controls in there, and just slowly but surely start working your way over.
And for those companies that are on the call that are Risk Evolves clients, obviously we'll be doing that with you and for you. We're working on the new template for the statement of applicability now to reflect these new controls. So no work for you to do there. And I guess actually just talking about controls, whilst we've got 114 currently, dropping to 93, not all of those controls may be applicable to your business. So again, back to, I'm assuming that we've still got the opportunity to not have all of the controls in place.
Yes, so as per the, I'll go back just to make it visible. So as per the previous slide, as I said there, the Annex SL structure is not changing. And the Annex SL structure at 6.13, sorry to be geeky, but it does say to you, create a statement of applicability, and then from that, select which controls are applicable to the risks you've identified. And where you haven't selected a control, give justification for its exclusion. So for example, a common one is we don't have a physical building, so we didn't need to control delivery areas, for example, or we don't do software development utilizing a third party, so we don't need third party control. So that whole process, the cyclical process of risk identification, risk control, proving that it works, going back to review the risk, that's still extant. That's going to remain. It's just a specific which controls are available to me that's going to change.
Fantastic. I'll pause because I know you and I have been talking now for about 25 minutes. Any questions from the floor? Anybody that would like to raise a question? Anything they just want to pop into the chat box? Any concerns, I guess? Or is anybody thinking this is possibly a good opportunity for their business to adopt 27001 for the first time? We've overwhelmed them all, Barry. No questions at all. So from a Risk Evolves perspective, as everybody knows, we tend to do these webinars on a quarterly basis. I'm pretty much guessing that we will have another session on the changes to 27001 as we get into September, as we start to see the certification bodies putting out a little bit more information, as we hopefully start to see ISO put out a little bit more information on these changes, because I've been all over the ISO website and actually haven't seen much at all.
No, there is more communication and correspondence to come, and I think knowing them like I do, there'll be, like you just suggested, a bit of a barren. This is going to happen, a bit of a barren period with nothing going on, and people worry, well, is this really coming? And then all of a sudden, it'll just land, and there'll be a plethora of communication heading out. So, but what we do know is, based on 27002, which was released in February and quite well documented, that this you can see on the screen there is going to be the structure.
Yeah.
And if you refer back to the white paper we put on our website, then that gives you the granular detail you may need to say, okay, and here is. But as always, as we go through the slides, one of the things we do like to do is invite people to come back and speak to us. So yeah, if you've got any questions you can think of further into this, or you want to speak to 5 minutes about what does this mean for me, what is data masking, what is threat intelligence, more than happy to field those outside of this webinar, definitely.
Brilliant. Okay. As we're almost at the bottom of the hour, Barry, I'm going to say thank you very much for taking us through the changes to 27001. Most people, I think, have got your email address. If not, if anybody's got any questions, come through to the info@riskevolves ID. And yeah, certainly we'll come back in September and do another webinar on where we can see the changes to 27001.
When the changes are well documented and the standards out there. Definitely.
Yeah, but thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and hopefully we'll see you on the remainder of the calls this afternoon. We've got one on driving at work. We've got another one on data privacy, which I think is going to be quite important because it links in quite nicely with what's going on with 27001 as well, and then also a session on environmental, social and governance. Thank you, everybody, for attending.